Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead, where I'm so excited today because we are going to do our first canning recipe with our new shortcut with tomatoes. Now, if you're not sure what that means, I'm going to put the little card up here that will take you to our micro moment where we talked about a shortcut tip for canning tomatoes. When you have a recipe that calls for 25 pounds of fresh tomatoes, it can be rather daunting to process those 25 pounds of tomatoes, getting the skins off, the seeds out, cooking it down to the proper consistency. Well, healthycanning.com, which is one of my very trusted resources, has, I have discovered on their channel, on their website, and here is the link for that website so you can check it out too, how the Italians don't do that. Rather, what they do is they process fresh tomatoes into a puree that they call passata, P-A-S-S-A-T-A. And I couldn't find that anywhere in any of our stores locally. And online it was cost prohibitive because of the shipping. I read further on the healthycanning.com website, and what they said was that it is the same as puree. And so I have discovered Cento tomato puree, product of Italy, and also Contadina. And I talk about that in that other video with what the equivalent measures are, and we'll be going through that. But instead of starting with so many pounds of fresh tomatoes that we have to think about processing, we are going to start with the already processed tomatoes. Now, when we published that video about a week ago, there were several people who commented on the fact that because I had talked about acidifying tomatoes, they had mentioned, well, I never put acid, I never put lemon juice or vinegar in tomatoes. I never have, because tomatoes are already high acid. And those of you that were born around the time that I was, or even a few years after me, grew up with none of us canned tomatoes with anything else other than tomatoes and salt, because tomatoes at that point in time were high acid. In the intervening years, and starting in 1988, the USDA has come out with a very strong recommendation to not can any tomato products, even with your homegrown tomatoes, unless you acidify it, because of the newer varieties of tomatoes which are not as high acid, and there is no determining the pH in advance of what tomatoes are like. And this is whether you water bath can or you pressure can tomatoes, all tomato products need to be acidified before processing. The Cento, and I was corrected in my pronunciation by 3 different people because I was saying Cento, and they said, no, it's pronounced Cento, and so I appreciate that very much, knowing the correct pronunciation. The Cento tomato puree is nothing but tomato puree. Contadina, which is another brand that I would also use as well with these, and there are a lot of other brands that I would not use, but my 2 would be the Cento and the Contadina, and there are probably other good ones, but look on the list of ingredients. Contadina also has citric acid. Cento does not. And so I thought what we would do is to start off by doing the pH of what's in the can so we can see where we stand. So Jim will come up close, and I'm going to take one of my testing strips. This is litmus paper, and where we are hoping to be for safe canning for safe water bath canning of anything, the acid level needs to be lower than 4.6. So we're looking for about this color, between this color and this color, as a cutoff. So here we go. And somebody asked me, when you put your strip into tomato sauce, how can you tell it's not the color of the tomatoes that is coloring it? So what I do is I dip, and then I just pull all the tomato stuff off, and then we try to match it. Okay, it's darker, lighter, 4. It's a 4. So this is a perfect match with this 4, which means that these tomatoes are all within the correct range of acidity that we are good to go with it. Nevertheless, we are still going to acidify. We are going to follow the tested recipe. Now today, we are going to do pizza sauce. Easiest pizza sauce ever, because we don't have to worry about the fresh tomatoes. And Healthy Canning has provided a recipe that gives us the exact measure of how much of this passata or the puree we need to start with. Other recipes will not do that, but I have figured out an algorithm based on the information that I got on Healthy Canning and elsewhere, so that we will be able to convert when it calls for fresh tomatoes and we want to use, and it calls for a smooth pureed tomato base. We can substitute this appropriate puree for the fresh tomatoes. And when we get to one of those recipes, I will share the algorithm with you. So the recipe comes from Healthy Canning, and I will be putting the link to the recipe in the description of the video. So here's all we have to do. We have to put in 2 quarts of this puree. So here is my 1 quart measure. Each of these cans is the equivalent of 3.5 pounds of fresh tomatoes. So that's 1 hint toward our algorithm. The USDA has carefully tested the amount of tomato puree with the amount of lemon juice that is required. We don't ever want to disrupt that ratio. So we measure very carefully 2 quarts of this tomato puree, and then it calls for 1/2 cup of canned lemon juice. And always use commercially canned lemon juice because it has a standardized acid level, unlike fresh lemon juice. Now I have probably a little more than 1 cup left, and what I will be doing with this is I will put that in a baggie and freeze it and add it to our food supply for our level 1 food storage, and many of you know what I'm talking about there. So here is the last of our tomato puree going in, and then for our lemon juice we need 1/2 cup. So I'm going to put that in right now. And I'm going to stir this. And we're going to check the pH again, just for the heck of it, because I'm curious. To see where we have landed. All right, we are now at 3. So that has taken us well within the safe zone for acidification. Now we're going to add the other ingredients, and this is very, very simple. Now, some of you with your pizza sauce may prefer to add onions or peppers or all of those other things. Don't do that unless you can find a tested recipe that takes into consideration the pH, because onions and peppers are both low acid foods. And so when you add those other foods that have a low acid level, that is going to mess with the pH, and it will raise the pH possibly beyond the safe zone. So don't add anything else, and I am not going to. So this recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of oregano. Now I want to show you the oregano that I use. This is my oregano. I order it through Amazon, and it comes in this package. This is dried oregano still on the stem, and it is Calabrian oregano. And I will put this in our Amazon store in case any of you want to check it out. But I have been using Italian oregano on the stem for several years, and I can hardly tolerate what comes in our spice bottles and cans in our grocery stores. This has such a magnificent aroma. It is unlike anything I had ever previously tasted or smelled for that matter. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 2 teaspoons of this dried oregano. And with the dried herbs, you can adjust the recipe. You can add more if you wish, or less. It calls for a teaspoon of pepper, a teaspoon of salt, and a teaspoon of garlic powder. All right, I'm going to stir this in and turn it on. With the fresh tomato puree that you do yourselves, calls for 13 cups. We have 8 cups of our already processed puree. So if you make your own puree, you will use 13 cups, and then you'll have to cook it down to about 8 cups. This makes 4 pints of pizza sauce. So all we really need to do with this, instead of cooking it down for about 25 minutes or longer, we just need to cook this for about 10 minutes to get it hot. We'll put it in the jars, and then we're going to put it in my steam canner and process it. Now, at sea level, we would process this in a steam canner or a water bath canner for 35 minutes is what the recipe calls for. Because we are at 5,000 feet, I know that I need to add 10 minutes. And there are charts all over the internet that you can look at to adjust the time if you are higher than sea level. You need to add 5, 10, or 15 minutes to your canning. Okay. Now, one more thing about the acidification. The reason that the USDA stepped in and started recommending strongly the acidification of everything tomato is because home canned tomatoes were found to contain botulism. And some people suffered as a result of that. And I don't remember whether or not there were any deaths, but there were a number of people that got very sick in several places in the country and around the globe. And so that is why. Now, also, peeling the tomatoes is very important, because even sometimes, according to the research that was done by the USDA, even washing the tomatoes does not always rid the tomato skins of the botulism spores that are sometimes found. And so that's why when we do tomato puree, we run it through a food mill that gets rid of the skin and the seeds. All right, so we're going to come back when this has come to a boil and we have about a 10-minute boil on it, and then we will be ready to bottle it up. My jars are sitting in the canner because we have to put it in hot jars. So we'll be back when we're ready to jar these up. All right, I am filling the jars. The jars are hot as they can be. The Pizza sauce is very hot. Whoop! That went in very fast. We leave a 1/2 inch of headspace, so that's about right. Okay, here's our 4 pints. Looks like we have a little bit left. Mathematically, I'm not sure how that happened because we only put 2 quarts of the puree in the first place, but I had another jar on standby just in case this might have happened. And it won't be a full pint, so it will be going in the refrigerator. I'm not going to process it. We'll use it here in the next couple of days. So we'll just set this one aside. Now I'm going to check for air bubbles here. And I have a damp paper towel. I will be wiping. This one is a little too full. This one is a little underfilled, so I'm just going to do that. Okay, we're turning this up, and as soon as the canner starts to steam, and it has steamed until we have at least a 6-inch column of steam coming out, then we will start our timing for 45 minutes at our elevation. So we will be back when these are ready to come out, and we'll take a look at what we have accomplished today. The canner is finished and it has been sitting for 5 minutes, so let's go ahead and see what we've got. I really love steam canning. The jars come out so clean and it uses so much less water. But here they are, 4 pints of pizza sauce. And I tasted it and it is really, really good. So we're going to enjoy this a lot. I think our first effort at using the puree as a substitute for fresh tomatoes has turned out perfectly. And so I'm really happy. And there will be more videos on other things that we can do with that puree. That is such a marvelous time saver. So thank you so much for being with us, and we will see you very soon for more videos.